Hello, I'm Robert Ellsberg, the publisher of Orbis books, and I'm very happy to be here today with an esteemed author, Rabbi Arthur Ocean Waskow, who is the author of a new book, Dancing in God's Earthquake, The Coming Transformation of Religion. Rabbi Waskow is a well-known prophetic voice in the religious community for peace, justice, care for the earth, and gender equality. He is the founder and director of the Shalom Center. And if you'd like to know more about his work, you can look at their website, theshalomcenter.org. I think his new book is really the culmination of a journey over the past 50 years, and in which he has been very creatively and prophetically reinterpreting and applying ancient wisdom to our lives. I remember when the book came in and I read it straight through and contacted you immediately. And I think you remember a very simple response that I made, don't you?
Yes.
I said, I love it.
Right.
Love your book.
That was the quickest and the warmest response I've ever gotten from any publisher.
Well, I aim to please, and the fact is that I love it even more than I did when I first read it, because even in the months since then, its wisdom and its relevance and its timeliness and its urgency have become even more obvious. Maybe you could start by just explaining what the title means and what that conveys about the theme of your book.
Well, actually, let me first start by saying shalom to
Shalom.
you, to all your listeners and watchers. So it started, the whole notion of dancing in the earthquake, God's earthquake, started out of my thinking about the earthquakes that we were living through, multi-dimensional earthquakes. Everything was up for grabs. Politics, the nature of war and peace, family life, sexuality. There wasn't anything that wasn't upending. And I remembered that two things happen when there's a physical earthquake. One is people don't know what to do and they just keep acting like nothing's happened. And if a building falls on them, too bad. Denial, in other words. The other is what you're told by the experts is to grab something that's immovable and hang on. I thought about a multi-dimensional social earthquake, and I realized that those two things are what most people were doing, but there was a third thing. The second thing, hanging on to something immovable, mostly turned out to be people grabbing maybe 17th century version of religion, which they thought was immovable. And in order for it to stay immovable, they had to try to coerce other people to hold on to it too. Otherwise, it would move. So that didn't seem to me very life-giving. And the denial response certainly wasn't life-giving. So I thought there needs to be another response. And when I looked around, what I saw was some people, minorities, but growing minorities of people in every philosophic and religious and spiritual tradition, reinventing their tradition and not ignoring it, not dumping it, but seeing it through new eyes. And that's what I began to call dancing in the midst of God's earthquake. That it was not easy when the dance floor itself is dancing. It's certainly not easy to dance with it. But as we learn to do it, it's the most life-giving response. So I decided to try to explore what that would mean for the next couple of generations and how practically, not utopianly, but practically, we could take the steps that would make dancing possible and get us not through, but with the earthquakes.
Well, the connection between the title and the subtitle, then the coming transformation of religion is, points in the direction of some of the particular kinds of earthquakes that you're talking about that have over the last, century, decades, millennia, whatever, have shaken the ground under our feet, and as you say, kind of make us wonder whether we're standing on something stable or whether we have to find some kind of different basis. And you're able to go back to uh, ancient biblical stories all the way back to Adam and Eve to kind of look at those in a creative way to see how their meaning might endure or apply or be life-giving today and not just holding us in place.
Right. So, for instance, the Adam and Eve story, first of all, it begins with the birth of, in Hebrew, Adam, meaning human being, from Adamah, meaning earth. And it's a story of birth, which I think takes off of from mammalian and human birth. Uh, the new birth uh, doesn't have a breath because mammals, before the actual birth, the new child is breathing through the mother's breath. And then the placenta is dropped or cut, and lo and behold, there needs to be an independent breath. And in the story in Torah, in the Bible, the story says that God, and I came to believe that the name that is used is simply, or not so simply, a breath of life, that God's name, or one of God's names in the biblical tradition, is the breath, the interbreath of life, breathes into the newborn from clay, from earth, human being, and humanity emerges. So I think that story is a very important lesson. Uh, the Torah, the Bible never calls um, Earth Mother Earth, but the description is absolutely of mothering. So that's the first thing. Then we get to the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Delight. Eden means delight in Hebrew. So it's the Garden of Delight. And the way I see what happens in the garden is this: the voice of the breath of life says, speaking for reality, there's incredible abundance here. It's wonderful. Uh, Eat of it, enjoy it, take real joy in it, and have a little self restraint. There's one part of the garden, don't eat from that part. But the human race doesn't show that self restraint. It's growing the first step from babyhood, when everything is being fed, to adolescence, when it wants to make its own decisions, the human race as a whole. And I've got this new take on what happens, the famous snake. There are two lines that come right after each other. One is that the male and female were naked and they weren't ashamed. They were like little children. Uh, and then the next line says, and the word for naked is arum. The next line says, the snake was the most arum of all the beasts of the field. And everybody translates that arum as meaning clever,
mm,
shrewd, uh, even though they're the same word.
mm,
And I found myself wondering what would happen if you thought that the second arum, like the first one, also meant naked and also had a double meaning, naked and clever. What would be going on? And then I imagine a whole conversation where the snake goes to the just about to become adolescent girl, woman, and says, uh, you know, I'm the most naked of all the beasts because I shed even my skin. What could be nakeder than that?
mhm,
Shedding my skin. And when I do, you would think that shedding my skin meant I was about to die. But it isn't true. I don't die. I get transformed, but I don't die. Now, you, mother of all life, are about to become uh, an adolescent woman who will shed her skin every month. But you won't die. It may look like it, you will bleed even, but you won't die. And so that voice that warns you if you eat from the tree, you're going to die, it's not true.
mm,
And the tree seems so, it smells so wonderful, it looks so delicious that the new adolescent woman decided to grow up another step and to eat from the tree.
mm,
Now, the trouble is that sometimes adolescents in their growth make wonderful choices about their new identity. And sometimes, as we know, adolescents make mistakes.
mm,
I think eating from the tree was a mistake. I think it would have been wonderful if Eve had said, wow, you were so wonderfully smelling and looking. I'm not going to eat from you because that would mean I had no self restraint about gobbling up all the uh, abundance of the garden, but I'm going to celebrate you. But she made, in growing up, she also made a mistake. And the result was that the abundance of the garden vanished. And the voice says, you're going to have to work really hard every day of your life in order to get just enough to eat, because the earth is going to give you thorns and thistles. And then the and the voice never says that's a command. You must work hard, sweat pouring down your face. You're not allowed to invent tools to make it easier. We never thought that was a command. And then the voice says, and now I'm sorry to tell you, uh, hierarchy is coming into the world and women are going to be subjugated. And we treat that like it's a command, but it's not a command. It's a description of, of a consequence that is, the idea is you have to grow up beyond the consequence. You have to grow up so there isn't a hierarchy in which women are subjugated. Just like you have to grow up so that men don't can invent tools and not have to work and can create a relationship with the earth that feeds everybody. But the tradition, both Jewish and Christian and Muslim too, treated the tradition as if it were a command that
mm,
women had to be subjugated. And at last, about 3,000 years later, we
mm.
are creating a society in which women are increasingly not subjugated. Hasn't ended yet, but it is well on the way. And that changes a lot of things uh, when we realize that this is what we need to transcend, that consequence of refusing to be uh, self-restrained vis-a-vis the earth when we think we can gobble up the whole thing. Uh, and we're now at the danger point in which we have invented tools that not only help us feed ourselves, but can total the earth, are already totaling the earth. That's a, a phrase that comes from the automobile, and not casually, not mistakenly. That if you act like you are in total control, you're going to total everything around you. So that's one of the major things inspiring me in the book. What does it mean to move into a world where we have the power
Mhm.
to destroy ourselves and everybody else and not use it? What does it mean to move into a world where women are fully equal and a whole lot of other changes that we need, dances that we need to
Mhm.
start learning to dance in the earthquake?
Well, you've given a really good flavor of what this book is about, and you carry on that kind of play with biblical stories and traditions in relation to not just the equality of women, but concern for the earth, idolatry, war and peace. But I don't. We're running out of time. I don't want to finish without recalling that after you had finished the book, suddenly we were confronted by new earthquakes that seemed to illustrate exactly what the book was about and called for some updating. Could you comment a little bit about that?
Well, the coronavirus came. Uh, I had already finished the book, and I remember calling you up and saying, people are going to think this is crazy. Here's a whole book about earthquakes, and it doesn't even mention coronavirus. Can we tuck in somewhere close to the beginning how the coronavirus is an example of the earthquakes that we ourselves have had a hand in creating? We have left other species no space. And so viruses they carry that don't make a difference to them suddenly leap from them because we're nudging our way into their space, suddenly leap into us. Uh, and so we need to talk about that. And so you said, well, I think we can figure out several pages at the beginning where you can do it. And that's what I did. And then there have been other earthquakes since then. One page we were able to get in that refers to the earthquake of, I think, the first time in American history, a multiracial uprising against racism. Uh, and just barely able to get in a comment on that too. Uh, but there's lots in the book that understood that the subjugation of the Black community and Muslims and the brown community, that was already ending, and that was going to be an earthquake that people had
It
to
really had the
understand.
effect of making it seem as if that was intended there from the whole book was a response to these earthquakes, kind of
Exactly.
earth trembling under our feet, and the question of what are the lessons going to be from this? Not just how do we survive, but whether this is an opportunity for some kind of renewal or rebirth.
That's what I call dancing.
The in fact the phrase that came from George Floyd as he was dying, "I can't breathe," almost summed up the kind of intersectional picture that you trace
Right,
of the
right,
coronavirus, climate change, and just the kind of neck of empire, of the force of empire and oppression on the necks of so many people.
right.
Uh,
And literally, I can't breathe. The coronavirus comes as a pulmonary disease, a disease of the lungs first, and we can't breathe. And the earth can't breathe because the interbreathing of the earth is CO2 and oxygen.
Mhm.
Uh, and we animals and vegetation breathe each other into life. And now the human race and some of its institutions, the ones I call the carbon pharaohs, bringing plagues on us, uh, they invent such ways of bringing so much CO2 that there's no way for all the plants, the trees and grasses of the world to turn it back into oxygen. And then we, the earth, can't breathe. So it's a very uncanny kind of moment in which I can't breathe, as the Black community has made a truth out of the danger, has been true about wider groups as well. And we're going to have to deal with all those can't breathes in order to be able to dance our way into a joyful abundance, a shared abundance.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Rabbi Arthur Waskow, for joining us, for writing this book, which I love, and I really dare to believe that anyone who reads this will share the same reaction. And it almost is a kind of guidebook, a window to understand the surely new earthquakes that are bound to befall us, within the next months or years. I want to thank you very much. And again, if anyone would like to know more about the Shalom Center, you can look at the website, theshalomcenter.org. I urge you very much to buy Rabbi Waskow's new book, which is available from Orbis Books. Thank you very much.
Thank
Shalom.
you again, and shalom. Be well. Peace.
Peace.